Education, labor strife, by-elections, a province grappling with austerity measures. The stage is set for an interesting autumn in Ontario politics. Tonight we're joined by two Queen's Park watchers about what's on the horizon. Martin Redcon, political columnist for the Toronto Star at Queen's Park, and Maria Babbage, legislative reporter for the Canadian Press covering Ontario politics. Martin, lovely to have you back.
Good to be here.
Maria, lovely to have you here for the first time.
Thank you.
Long overdue that you've been here. Okay. On the assumption that not everybody who's watching us now has followed every permutation of what's gone on at Queen's Park over the summer, let's just go back a bit, get people caught up for what they missed. A bit of an unusual summer, Martin, insofar as the House is back early. We had committee hearings that got a lot of attention. Fill us in. Where do you want to start?
Long, hot summer. There was a lot of talk about Orange, committee hearings that continued while the legislature was more or less recessed. An opportunity for the opposition to really go after the government and create a kind of, to frame an issue of scandals and incompetence and mismanagement, not just on Orange, which is the air ambulance situation we've discussed before on the show, but also the cancellation of gas plants in Mississauga and in Oakville before that, $190 million to cancel that gas plant, and a lot of flack because that was canceled, as you know, before the just in the dying days of the last election campaign. So Orange, air ambulance, gas plants, just general mismanagement, concerns that the opposition has pushed forward, and then the teachers issue has come to the fore as well, and that took a lot of time.
Hold off on that, we'll go to the teachers later. The Orange hearings were really quite extraordinary, right? The guy everybody wanted to hear from, Chris Mazza, finally showed up.
Yeah, there was a lot of explosive testimony this summer. We had Chris Mazza, who gave a very emotional appearance before the committee, and he raised a lot of questions that still haven't been answered. We also had a visit from the ex-chairman of Orange, who made some very explosive allegations at the end of his testimony, talking about this alleged kickback scheme at Orange.
And all of that adds up to what, do you think?
Well, Orange doesn't have, we don't have a lot of answers on Orange, so a lot of it has been directed to the government. What happened? Why weren't they overseeing this organization? And those questions really haven't been answered. As well, the opposition has been demanding the health minister's head over this, and they've resisted those calls for her resignation.
And Martin, one of the things the opposition has wanted is the Premier to show up and testify at this committee. Yes. Any indication that that's going to happen?
No, I don't think it will happen unless the pressure is raised even stronger. I think it's pretty clear that the Premier's office feels it will only grant more, not ammunition, but it will put the Premier in an awkward and uncomfortable pose. You have the same feeling sometimes in the US that a president doesn't come before Congress unless he's perhaps being impeached. I think the Premier's approach in the last few weeks, or last couple of weeks since the legislature has been back, has been to say, here I am, I'm in question period, come and get me. He's now answering their questions on Orange. He didn't used to before. Previously, he would pass those questions on to his House Leader and seem to be stalling. The opposition says, well, wait a minute, that looks easy, like you're here now, but in question period, even though you're there for an hour, you can only have a fairly scripted exchange of about 30 or 60 seconds back and forth supplementaries. When you're in committee, you can't run away, you can't hide, the Speaker doesn't call a timeout, you're not saved by the bell. In committee, you're there probably for a day or a half day and you're grilled, you're really held to account. That said, there are a few, I think the Premier should go there, I don't know why he doesn't, he just leaves himself open to accusations that he has something to hide. But I don't...
The other side of that is that anytime the opposition wants to get the First Minister to show up before a committee, they can turn something that's small, and I'm not saying Orange is, but you know, you can turn something small into a big story just by having the Premier show up.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of optics and politics going on here, but you know, that's the nature of minority government. The legislature is supreme, and there was a majority of members on that committee that called the Premier to account.
Having said that, Maria, let's look at the actual merits of this quote-unquote invitation for him to come. He is in question period almost every day. He has been answering their questions. The Minister of Health has been answering questions. During the committee process, there have had numerous witnesses come forward to answer questions. Is there really a need for the Premier to show up to answer things that the committee members now don't know?
Well, the argument could be made that the Premier, while he's answered questions about Orange, he hasn't done so under oath. And that could add a bit more to questions and answers you're given under oath are sometimes can be very different from what you're saying in question period, where it's easy to dodge a question, or in front of reporters, where it can be easier to dodge a question as well.
Do they really think he's lying in the House, but he'll tell the truth at committee?
Well, he's been very vague in the House. He said that he met Chris Mazza once during the Saskatchewan crisis, that Mazza took him around to meet some of the emergency relief workers. But then he said, well, I could have met him at another event, at a fundraiser. I'd go to a lot of them and I meet thousands of people.
Which is true.
Which is true. But Mazza said he met with the Premier. So, I mean, I think what people want to know is, what did the Premier know about this, really? I don't think they're really that concerned about whether he met Mazza, but what did he know about this? Did he know that the agency was out of control? And if so, you know, is he a real leader for letting that go on?
If I may, look, I think he should. I don't think he wins anything by not going, other than maybe depriving the opposition of a roadshow. But at the end of the day, I think it's a bit of a sideshow. It's a process issue. I don't think it's that important to know what the Premier knew and when he knew it, because there are other people who are accountable, like the Health Minister, like the bureaucracy, like the Deputy Health Minister and the senior bureaucrats who should have been watching Orange. Orange is an important issue, and I think we can get lost on or bogged down on some of the political games that all oppositions are meant to play. That's part of their job. What I would just raise as a caution, I'm not sure how much, even though I'm very proud of the coverage that our newspaper has undertaken on this, the Star, sorry for this paid political
we don't
advertisement,
run commercials on TV.
But the Star did raise this issue and pursued it, but not that many other papers have. I mean, we've been helped by some of our colleagues and certainly at the Canadian Press, but I've been told by other friends in Ottawa, for example, that the Orange issue doesn't have that much traction. So I don't know how much this is hurting if we're talking about pure politics, the Liberal government. I think the power plant issue does have more resonance, even though it's also a rather more complex issue than the opposition says.
Let's follow up on that right now. We're going to go back to last October. In the dying days of the campaign, the Liberal government comes out, Dalton McGuinty says, we are cancelling this gas plant that's going to apparently be built, or was in the process of being built in Mississauga. Result being, the Liberals save all their Mississauga seats, all their Etobicoke seats, and end up one seat short of a majority government. Cost to breaking the contract? $190 million. Discuss. What do we think of this?
Well, I think the Liberals over time have really made some interesting decisions around election time. We had two by-elections, if you remember, a few years ago in Ottawa and in Toronto Centre, where decisions were made about local projects that seemed to be pandering to that electorate, those voters there. There was, I think, an estimated $50 million for a Toronto hospital that was in Toronto Centre, and then there was something like $200 million for Nortel retirees when Bob Chiarelli was running in one of the West Ottawa ridings. So, you know, these things add up, and I think when you make these decisions and then you've got a $190 million price tag attached to it, people are going to wonder if this government's running out of steam, and the way that they think they can win elections is by bribing voters to save seats.
Martin, let me set this up again for you in a somewhat different way. We're going through all of what we're going through with the teachers right now, with two teacher unions in particular, because the government wanted not to be obligated to about $400+ million worth of salary increases that the teachers would have been entitled to. And yet, almost $200 million in unanticipated expenditure to cancel a gas plant to save some seats in Mississauga. I'm simplifying, but essentially to save some seats in west of Toronto. How does that math make sense?
It doesn't make sense, but I'm going to go one step further than the opposition and many of my friends in the media and say that they should not have canceled the gas plant. That won't make me very popular at Sherway Gardens and thereabouts, but I thought they should have gone ahead. This is pure NIMBYism, and the opposition doesn't say this, but they were playing the same game. They too would have canceled the plant wrongly, in my opinion, and also held us up for $190 million. So everyone was playing politics here. The Tories supported the cancellation. The NDP never wanted to build a power plant. God bless them. But I think we oversimplify when we say that this was money that the opposition somehow would have saved, or that it was a bribery scandal. What it was terrible timing. There was no reason for the Liberals to try and do it so expediently 2 weeks before an election call, 2 weeks before voting day, when they were clearly trying to save seats that, by the way, they probably would have won anyway.
Well,
so in that sense, it was a waste of money, especially.
And the finance minister did say in a committee that that they were down in the polls when they made that decision. And that was a very interesting statement by him, because it sort of adds fuel to the opposition fire that this was all about saving Liberal seats.
I think it also emerged in those hearings that it wasn't the Ministry of Energy, the Minister of Energy, or any independent report that suggested canceling that plant. It was the campaign team.
Yeah.
So it was a political decision, obviously.
Yeah, mind you, parties make all kinds of promises during elections, and people know that they're going to have to pay for them someday. So it was a campaign promise. I don't think there was any, wrongdoing in having a party make that call. It's just that, when you're talking $190 million, you'd hope that a government would make that decision, not a party.
Let's, now having looked at what the government was up to over the summer, talk a bit about what the opposition was up to. We shouldn't assume that because the House wasn't sitting, that the two opposition leaders, Tim Hudak and Andrea Horwath, weren't working, because from time to time they were. For example, what did Tim Hudak have up this summer?
Well, Tim Hudak has been trying, I think, to make amends for the last election campaign when he was accused, I think justifiably and by his own admission, of running too much of an anti-McGuinty campaign, an anti-HST campaign, and an anti-hydro campaign, an anti-smart meter campaign, an anti-debt retirement charge campaign.
Key word here being anti.
Anti. And now he is trying to ante up on his own and say, here's what I'm going to stand for, more or less. These are so-called white papers. It's a bit of a misuse. They're actually green papers, if you want to be a process junkie, because they are proposals by a government, which they are not yet. But they are opposition attempts to put things out there. They don't stand by them. They're discussion papers, in short. And they've already issued a couple, one on, energy, hydro, right? And one on the unions. And you could...
They call labor flexibility.
Correct, yes. So this, but to use their words, union bosses are part of the target, union membership, the right to opt out. Big talking point. Got a lot of publicity, not just in Ontario, but in national coverage, national media. And so they're trying to set an agenda, a conservative agenda, and without being held to it. So it's a clever strategy. I approve it. I use the word strategy not as a criticism. It's good to get a discussion going. And there are more coming down the pike, but that's what they've spent a lot of the summer working on.
How successfully, Maria, in your view?
I'm not sure if people have been paying attention over the summer, so I sort of wonder whether or not putting out a discussion paper in July is really the best course of action. People's attentions are drawn elsewhere. They released this labor paper the same week that we saw the mall collapse in Elliott Lake, so there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to it, but they just continued to try and promote it over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I don't know if that message is getting through, but certainly Tim Hudak is spending as much time as he can, meeting with the party faithful and trying to convince them that he's serious, that this time it will be different the next time we go to
Does it seem to you as if he has learned the lessons, whatever they may have been, of the last election campaign?
I think he's learned some of the lessons. He still tends to stick to the script when he's speaking to reporters or when he's on camera, which is not it's really not a great way of doing things. But he's also, I think, tried to change his image a bit.
From what to what?
Well, I think during the election, people just sort of thought him as Angry Tim. He was, as you said, anti-everything. I think now he's trying to show that he has a plan, a larger plan for the province. I think he's trying to show that he can lead the province. He's not just angry about stuff. He actually has some ideas. Now, whether those ideas are simply, recycled or repackaged change book promises, I mean, that'll be up to the voters to decide. But he's certainly, in his promotional material, the photos he's using sort of give him more gravitas. I think he's really trying to show that he can be the next premier.
Just one thing to add to that, though. Even if people aren't paying very close attention to Queen's Park in the summer or ever Queen's Park, the fact is every time they put out one of these papers, they also put out direct mail to their supporters. They reach out for fundraising, and that's important to try to rally the base, secure Mr. Hudak's position at what will be a tough time this week, but also to keep the money coming in. This party has a $6 million debt that they have to retire.
B's now instead
Correct,
of M's.
yes.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. They still do. Okay, Andrea Horwath, her summer, what's up?
Well, took her kid to university the other day. That's top of mind for me. But she's been working hard in Kitchener-Waterloo, which I know we'll talk about later. The NDP, I don't think they've been that visible over the summer. They had a great spring, and that's what we were talking about previously. They had a tremendous influence or significant influence on the government's direction in the spring, and then they had their kind of separation agreement in June, July, when they went their separate ways. And I think they've been kind of lying low. I think everyone knew that the teachers' debate was coming, which we'll talk about later, I guess. But so the NDP has been doing its own thing. They were active in some of their fairly constructive private members' bills on tanning salons, and there were a couple of others that I can't quite recall. But auto insurance is another one. So they've been nose to the grindstone on some basic issues and working hard on the north, but nothing that has been high level.
Maria?
They've been very vocal before the legislature was released for the summer, but they were very vocal about things like the ONTC, the Ontario Northland Transportation Commission, which became an issue during the budget negotiations. So they've been really trying, I think, to keep this this message going that they are able to work with the government, that they do politics differently. And I think Andrea Horwath is really coasting on very good polling numbers that show that she's one of the more popular leaders. And I think she's been, she's been going around touring the province, as Hudak has. But I think she's trying to borrow a little bit from Jack Layton's playbook and try to show that the NDP aren't, and she is not this socialist zealot. She is someone who can work with others. She's going to stick to her party's roots, but that she can compromise occasionally. She can do things that perhaps other leaders haven't in the past.
Okay, we have presaged the two big issues that we want to get to, namely teachers and by-elections, so let's get to those right now. What are you hearing? Let's start with KW. What are you hearing?
Everything and nothing, in the sense that everybody says it's too close to call.
Yeah.
What everyone agrees on from the three parties is that the turnout will be low. They're looking at something in the low mid-30s as a turnout, which is
typical.
Yes, it is typical, but we're all thinking about what are the people saying, and not all the people vote in a by-election. So that's one issue, which means that the ground game is very important. And given that there are only two by-elections going on, one of which is hotly contested, all three parties can throw all of their resources into that one. Vaughan is kind of a foregone conclusion as a Liberal seat, more or less. But that means you can they can raise and spend the maximum amount of money, which is about $100,000 for each party, for the 98,000 or so voters in that riding. And there are three very strong candidates, local candidates, will make a difference, and it will, I think, give the NDP an edge, because they have a candidate who, like the others, is very accomplished, but has also very high name recognition for having been a school trustee for many years. And there was a lot on the line, which we'll talk about, but for all three leaders, not so much for Andrea Horwath. She has a no-lose because they were so far behind in the last election that any showing would be an improvement, and if they win or come a close second, that is a tremendous boost for their morale. But she has very little to lose. She's coming from so far behind. The other two leaders, they're really going to be judged on voting night.
What are you hearing on KW?
Very, as you said, everything and nothing. It's all the polls seem to be showing that the three parties are in a very, it's a horse race that one of the three could win. And we're not sure, but I think that with, as you say, the NDP have very little to lose, but the Conservatives and the Liberals, there's a lot at stake there, because if Hudak doesn't win this riding, that riding has been Tory for 22 years. That might show that people might get the message that perhaps he's not as strong a leader as they thought post-election. And if the Liberals lose, well, there's also the very fun option of winning and then having a majority government. But if they lose, that might be a blow to McGuinty, in that his what he's been trying to do since the election, his attempts at running a minority government, aren't really resonating with people, and perhaps there should be another strategy.
Okay, but Martin, tell me this. This seat has not been Liberal in more than 2 decades. I don't know if it's ever been Liberal. Presumably.
Yes, because when we were younger, it was Herb Epp.
Okay.
So I remember it in my dotage as a Liberal riding.
It's a different riding. It was Waterloo North back then. Different name. But the fact is, governments usually have a tough time winning by-elections. That's number one. Number two, so many people say that the McGuinty government is sort of on its last legs and doing badly. How are they even still in the game if they're doing that badly? And they are in the game.
Yeah. I don't think they're on their last legs by any means. I think the reason that I think McGuinty is going to may have cause for reflection when the votes are counted is that he invested a lot in this. He set up the game by giving Elizabeth Whitmer, the incumbent, a very nice position at the WSIB as chair. at a very nice salary. And so that more or less opened up, more than less, it opened up the seat for the Liberals in what was one of the very few winnable Tory ridings, because there are other ridings where there are other people who might be easier to lure in, but they couldn't really have a good strong shot at it. This is their best shot. If he does badly, then people will say, well, what happens next? Because the next benchmark will be the spring budget, where the three parties will have a harder time agreeing on the tough decisions that have to be made. So there might be an election at that point. So does McGuinty want to stay in for that medium to long haul? For Tim Hudak, there is a lot at stake as well, because it was a Tory riding. They'll say it was a Whitmer riding, but it was a Tory riding for a long time. It has a lot of good, solid Tory demographics. And even if it's not his fault, someone has to account for, if they lose, if the Liberals do win, then they will have lost the leverage of minority government, and it will be Tim Hudak's fault.
How do you like the fact the Tory candidate, when asked at an all-candidates meeting, what about your leader, said, I'm not here to defend my leader?
Yeah, I felt bad. She's a first-time candidate. The other two are more seasoned pros. And look, for everything I'm hearing, is that Tim Hudak is not an asset at the doorstep. That number of people in that riding, it's an affluent, well-educated riding that should be Tory. One hears that they think he's too right-wing. Sometimes perhaps a bit of backfiring from those discussion papers that they're putting out. I think there's a lot riding on the line for Mr. Hudak, especially if Ms. Horvath wins. If the NDP wins, comes from behind, how does Tim explain that? Now, I don't think he's a dead duck. I'm not anticipating any coup. I'm not anticipating anything more than a more rambunctious caucus meeting next time. But it'll be tough to explain away, and he'll need some good lines on the morning after.
Speaking of explaining away, let's spend our remaining moments talking about, we are in the first week back to school for most of the students of this province, and the government is in hip deep with the teacher union, a couple of teacher unions anyway. The government has always described the teachers as, quote unquote, our partners. When you look at the way they have approached this whole issue, does it feel that way to you?
Well, I think that if you look at what agreement they signed with the Catholic teachers and with the Francophone teachers, I think, they did give, there was some compromise. The province did have a very specific set of terms, and that was softened somewhat in this deal that they got with the teachers. And it's actually not too bad if you look at things like they're doing 3 unpaid days off in exchange for a wage, or to get this wage freeze. But I think a lot of teachers, they've spent 9 years, helping to re-elect this government, or at least the unions have. They spent a lot of money doing that. So, you're seeing now a lot of teachers and the union leaders who are very disappointed. They feel betrayed by the Liberals. But on the flip side, I mean, if the Premier wants to show that he's serious about this, why not go after the people who he has the closest relationship with, or the ones that are very cozy with the Liberals? I'm serious about this, it even means you. I think that's his message.
When Bill Clinton went after, they called it the sister soldier moment, right? When he went right after his base and criticized his base and ended up getting rave reviews on it because he had the guts to stand up to his base. Are Liberals interpreting this the same way? The teachers' unions have been with McGuinty for 9 straight years and very much helped him get reelected twice. Is this a sister soldier moment for them?
I think it is. I think there is so much emotion wrapped up in this as well, because you talk about a relationship, and when there is a difficult conversation, there's a lot of baggage that's being carried on all sides here. I think McGuinty was boxed in. The teachers have had pretty good pay raises. We've talked about this before. They've had 25% in the cumulative since the McGuinty government came to power in 2003. They've had 12% over the last 4 years, most of the unions, except for elementary teachers, because they couldn't come to terms last time.
Who could have had it had they wanted
Correct.
to, but walked away.
Instead of getting 12, they took 10. So it's time. Look, the government honored that contract during tough economic times. We're still the economy is still very sluggish. So I think we all have to agree that a tough decision had to be made. Has McGuinty handled it in the most enlightened way? I don't think so. I think he's gone a bit too far. I don't think he needed to recall the legislature early, for example, 2 weeks early, in order to ram through an anti-strike bill when no one had yet taken the decision to go on strike. So there was politics there that's clearly aligned to the by-elections. Just look at the by-election ads to see how Liberal candidates are trying to claim credit for ensuring that parents can relax because their kids are going to school. So there's a bit of political monkey business going on right now, and I think McGuinty's hands are not completely clean on this. That said, the teachers' unions, as you've heard from other people, are very hard to please on this issue. The Catholic Teachers Union and the Francophone Teachers Union have shown that it is possible to have a creative negotiation and come to a reasonable compromise. The elementary school and high school teachers in the public sector don't seem willing to come to an agreement.
But if you look at the last 25 years of Ontario political history on this, the teacher unions wanted to get rid of David Peterson, and they did. And then they wanted to get rid of Bob Ray, and they did. And they ended up getting Mike Harris, which they weren't happy about, but they sure went out and worked against him, and Ernie Eves couldn't keep it going. They've now, I guess, the divorce is pretty seriously in place now between McGuinty and the teacher unions. Has he taken too big a risk in going up against the teacher unions this time? We've seen what that can mean in the past.
That's true, although if you look at what's been happening, you've seen two groups of teachers, right? You've got the ones who have signed this deal that are going back to school knowing that they won't have to deal with a strike. And then you've got this other group, which is actually much larger. The groups that they've actually made a deal with are about 55,000 educational workers. This other group, it's 191,000 teachers, educational assistants, and it's just, they've tried to divide and conquer, I think. But the issue now is whether or not they are going to have strikes, labor strife in their school. I mean, McGuinty, when he came in 2003, and since then he's been, coasting on this record of there is no disruption in our schools. I'm the education premier, and that's something he may not be able to brag about for much longer.
There are two issues, two ways of looking at this issue. Is he doing the right thing? I believe so. Is he doing it the right way? Not really.
Interesting. Okay. How do you want to make the distinction here? You agree with the policy?
Oh yeah.
That it's the right thing to do.
The fact that the Catholic teachers and the Francophones came to an agreement, a creative negotiation, without walking away from the table as the other bigger unions did, I think is a vindication, a validation of the Liberal government strategy, which everyone understands to be necessary, perhaps except our NDP friends, who have their own battles that they fought years ago with Ray Days. The credit rating agencies are breathing down our back, and the teachers had a good deal for the last few years. It's time to tighten their belts. Where he didn't do it the right way was in recalling the legislature early, which he didn't have to do. There was no strike threat. He's just created one as a pretext in order to profit from it on by-election day. So that's my concern.
So cynical, man. You are so cynical. All right, in our last few minutes here, the fall will soon be upon us. What do you anticipate? What are you looking for as you look at the session ahead?
Well, a lot of it depends on what happens in the by-elections, of course. If the Liberals get a majority, they won't have to worry as much about getting bills passed. I don't think they'll have to worry very much about a spring budget confidence motion. And if they don't get that majority, then I think we'll see a lot more of the same. However, I think that the next battle will be, as I said, in the spring, in the confidence motion on the budget. So they can they're either going to have to, draft a budget that is going to please one of the parties, or they're going to have to go through this negotiation again with the NDP or the Conservatives, which may not end very well. Last time it ended with a lot of name calling, and I don't think anyone looked very good after that.
Martin.
I agree, more of the same, but more of the same means a lot more mess, a lot more trouble and challenges. So that means more public sector restraint, because it is going to be across the board. College teachers have just signed in the last few days, in fact. So you'll see there's a million-strong broad public service and about 70,000 civil servants, and all of them are going to face that restraint. We have to recognize that because of, among other things, opposition bell ringing and delay tactics, not a lot got done in this first year since the last election. So for example, a home renovation tax credit for seniors, that was a big election, or a juicy election promise a year ago, still has not been passed. So there's other legislation, other follow-up with the doctors. We still don't have an agreement with the doctors. All we have is a one-way restraint on some of their fees. I think you'll see more issues on implementation with hydro utilities. They have to still figure out how to do transformation in the healthcare sector and transformation everywhere, following up from your favorite report written by Don Drummond a year ago. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot more of the same.
Can we get just finally some clarification on this Kitchener-Waterloo by-election? If the Liberals, everybody thinks they're going to win Vaughan. If they do win Kitchener-Waterloo, that means they'll have 54 seats. 54 is a majority in a 107-seat House. However, they're -1 because the Speaker is a Liberal. So there are 53 votes, except in the case of a tie when the Speaker votes for the status quo. That means if everybody shows up, the government survives any confidence vote. But it doesn't mean that if they want to get a bill passed, they can do that. So it's not a majority government in the way we understand majority governments, right? They'll live to fight another day, but they're still going to need a partner anytime they want to pass something. Right, guys?
I agree. Our shorthand in our bureau is to say a de facto majority, which is shorthand for they survive the budget and other confidence measures which would otherwise topple the government, but they still don't have clear ceiling on routine business. So it will be difficult. It's not really fair because it means the opposition can profit from the fact that one of the Liberal members is the Speaker, even though they would have a majority. But also remember, as I think we were suggesting earlier, you can't always count on all of your members to be in line. So even with a razor-thin majority, they could easily have one or two maverick MPPs who dance to their own tune.
Go ahead.
I agree with you on it will be difficult for them to get legislation passed, but I disagree that the Liberals in some way don't actually have a majority. If they win that, they will have control of the committees. They will, I guess, with the Speaker issue, I mean, he can vote any way he likes. But if the Liberals are very serious about having 55 members, then what they could do is offer the Speaker a cabinet post and then refuse to run any Liberal candidates for the Speaker. So, I mean, essentially people look at that and they think, oh, well, it's still a tie. But I think the government's, if they do get that seat, if they do get a majority, they control the House, so there's no doubt about it.
Our opposition friends will say, but we won't put forward a member either, and I remind them that that's what they said last time, and we all know that Frank Cleese went forward.
Yeah, that's true. Guys, thanks so much for this whirlwind look at the past several months down at the Ontario Legislature. Maria Babbage from the Canadian Press, Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star. Good of you both to join us tonight here on TVO.
Good to be here.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.